My name is Charles Braithwaite. I'm a professor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. As I mentioned, Nebraska is in the very center of the United States. Um, Although I grew up in California, uh, I miss the ocean. Um, I've been at Nebraska for 14 years now. Um, my um, what I'll do today is talk about, um, I guess, a case study of teaching language and culture, where we use live video conferencing technology to connect our students with universities around the world. Um, we certainly will have time for questions at the end, but I'd like to ask the participants if if as I'm talking today, if I go too fast, if there's something you need me to explain, um, please use the chat feature. I'll do my best to address questions as we go. Um, but I want to thank you so much for this opportunity. Um, you'll see that I love to talk about this um model we use. Um, I've been teaching for 28 years now, and my specialty is the field of communication studies. I teach courses in public speaking, interviewing. I'm teaching a course next semester on nonverbal communication, the non-language aspect of how we communicate. Um, And most of my teaching, though, focuses on the study of culture and intercultural communication. Um, and that's how how I started using web conferencing. Most of my comments will focus on using video links uh, for an intercultural communication course. However, I do work with colleges who, and well, probably most of the colleges around the world we work with are interested in using this technology to help their students improve their English, their use of English. Um, in fact, I recently received a grant from the University of Costa Rica, one of our partners, where we are currently studying how how our this as I'll talk my global classroom model um, helps English language learning for Costa Rican students and cultural learning for both English and U.S. students. But again, if you have questions as I go, if I don't explain something clearly, please let me know. Um, this picture, by the way, was taken on my recent trip to Tumen. This is a Stefan, who's a representative of the Hanti people, um, showing me some of. They have an anthropology museum, and again, that kind of cultural learning is so important. But as we know, not all of our students have that opportunity. I'm going to go to the next slide. Uh, my job in communication studies is the academic director of what we call the global classroom. You can see from this slide our class picture. This one, I believe, is it's one of our classes with Turkey. Um, we work with Istanbul, as well as Ataturk University in Erzurum, which is on the eastern side of Turkey. Um, I developed this course with initial funding from the United States State Department, who believed that it was vital for U.S. American students to have more direct contact with people around the world. And so with some initial funding from the US government, I was able to travel to various schools to try to convince them that having their students talk face to face, as it were, with US American students would be beneficial. Now, as you'll see in my comments, I'm focusing on higher education, on colleges, but this same model has been used in high schools. When I was in Tumen, I'm working with some people there. Um, see, somebody said they can't see the next slide. The slide should read Academic Director, Global Classroom. Does that appear? Oops, let's see. Could I get some confirmation as to whether you can see the next slide? It says it's slide number 2. It says Academic Director. Okay, some are seeing. Thank you. Um, what I do as this director is do some traveling. Um, our first partner was Voronezh State Agricultural University, and I went there and did my best to convince them that it would be a beneficial for them to have an opportunity for students to talk to face to face. Since then, I've traveled to Voronezh and Tumen in the Russian Federation, 3 schools in Turkey, Islamabad, Pakistan, uh, Fatma Jinnah Women's University, the first public women's university in Pakistan, University of Science and Technology in Yemen. Unfortunately, we've lost our connection with Yemen, partly due with the politics. Um, this is um, this is something that this course is somewhat influenced by, is political situations, but we can talk about that more as we go. Um, at Nebraska, we have 3 sections, 3 different classes where we use this model that I'll be talking about. Um, Let me go to the next slide to give you a better picture of what we do. Um, this one shows you one of our classrooms where we are talking, in this case, it's a class with one of our earlier classes with Voronezh State Agricultural University. And we use a couple of different technologies. Most of the time it's a system called Polycom or Tandberg, and I can give you more information on that. That allows us to have live, real-time interaction. You can see that we have it set up to where as the students, for example, in this case, the students in Russia are talking, uh, we are also seeing their PowerPoint presentation. And the same thing occurs when my students talk. Um, this um, model that I'm using, again, is in the college classroom, but it's been used in other classrooms as well. It requires a little more discipline on the part of the students since you can't talk at the same time. You can't overlap. Um, my focus is on teaching um, my students to be more effective in working with people of other cultures. We work on when, like, as I try to do myself, um, when you talk to people who have English as a second or third or fourth language, um, what do you need to do in terms of your speaking rate, in terms of enunciation? We talk about paying attention to the language and the words we use. Most US American students don't have any idea how uh, easy it is to be misunderstood when they talk about various parts of their life. Um, Most importantly, we try to teach patience. Um, Patience with the technology, as we've seen this morning already. Occasionally, some people can't hear, some people can't see. Mm, This is part of using new technologies. Um, One of the unique things about this model is, as you can see, we project life-size images for the most part, and uh, that creates an environment that makes it like a real classroom. The State Department referred to this as a virtual classroom, but I don't like that term because that implies it's not real. Um, to me, this is very real. Um, and the longer we have classes, we have about 24, uh, 24 video links per semester. The students really treat it as a real life classroom situation. The um, we have the video cameras there, and we turn them on. In our case, 8 in the morning in Nebraska, which is like 7 at night in Tumen, or 4 in the afternoon in Istanbul, and we're able to talk just like we're in the same room. Uh, the next slide I'll show you is from my recent trip to Tumen State University, and what this is one where we don't have life-size images, but you can see the students in Russia. They see in the middle screen the a PowerPoint slide by my students. I'm here. I'm in Tumen during this session, um, and then the other video screen shows the students. Um, this was done again in Tumen, where as long as you have, as I'll mention, a bandwidth of about 250, um, then we're not working with high definition TVs or TV connections. As long as you can hear and see, and then the projection, then the PowerPoint is there. Um, we have a very good connection in a classroom. For many of these students, almost all of them, uh, this was their first time talking directly to US American students. And they get a chance to see the diversity of our classroom. They get a chance um, to see how our classrooms are structured, the kind of activities we do, um, and obviously vice versa too. Uh, as I'll mention, there are so many things that my students learn about the people we're talking to that they're never going to learn in a textbook. And that's um, that's the exciting part for me as well. Um, in order, as I'll mention, in order to help in the language learning or any language barriers, um, we have students prepare PowerPoints. Let me go to the next slide here. Um, the PowerPoint slides help both cultures, both groups, because as I'll mention, um, it gives them some security as they're speaking English to a U.S. audience. With my students, it lets them give an outline of the material, and I'll give examples of what the kind of things that they might talk about. Well, for example, um, we're the students in Turkey were asking about some of our religious holidays. Turkey is 98% Muslim. And so while they know something about the Christian uh, ceremonies and Jewish ceremonies and Buddhist ceremonies and Hindu ceremonies that some of my students participate in, they don't know how it affects their daily life. So um, this uh, this gives my students a chance to teach them about some important parts. I know one of our earlier classes with Russia, one of the comments that a Russian student made, well, he made two comments at the end of the semester. He said um, he didn't know how, before the class, how hard U.S. American students work. Since students in the U.S. have education so very expensive, they all of my students have jobs in addition to going to school. But he also said he didn't know how religious so many American students were, U.S. American students. And this is something that I was real pleased to hear, that it helped challenge some of the stereotypes. Um, Another student on the same topic in Russia, um, he again, my students talked about the volunteer work they do. Um, Again, almost all of my students do some volunteering for the homeless or for hungry children. And the student in Russia said, before this class, I thought all Americans were fat and lazy. Now, after this class, I know they're not lazy. And that's a comment that stuck with me very well. And again, it really does help break down some of the stereotypes. My students, not surprisingly, have many outdated stereotypes of life in Russia. Um, I'm embarrassed to say that they still have images from the 1960s. Probably they see them in their textbooks showing people waiting in line for bread. And they have no idea what the daily life is like. And this course helps change that. Um, One of the things, I'll go to the next slide here, um, it's not just lectures, certainly not lectures by teachers. Um, the question answer period is the most important part of the course, where my students might do a presentation or even just an introduction about themselves, where they grew up, what they're studying, and then the students have a chance to directly ask questions to them. And we don't know what they're going to ask. We don't know what they're going to say. Um, it teaches my students patience, since it takes some time for their partners to formulate a question. Sometimes we don't always understand because of access. Then we have to work at it and tell my students, okay, to Monish may have, I notice, for example, the students Monish may have, I notice, for example, the students Monish may have, I notice, for example, the students Monish may have I noticed, for example, the student Onish may have. I noticed, for example, the students in Voronezh um, talked more about religion. In fact, a Russian Orthodox priest came to one of our classes, and uh, we have to be careful that we don't overgeneralize to all aspects, especially a country so large. This When we work with Pakistan, my students again have many stereotypes of especially the women in Pakistan. They all wear head coverings. They all have arranged marriages, at least in the school that we were at. And so um, those questions about that life, I remember my students asking, how could you let your parents choose a husband for you? And the Pakistani women, all of them said their fathers, especially, would do nothing to hurt them. And why wouldn't they trust their parents? It was a really good discussion. Um, we also had a wonderful discussion when um, you might remember a few years ago there were some cartoons published in a Danish newspaper um, about the Prophet Muhammad that caused much controversy, and um, uh, we had to end the class early because the women in Pakistan said, "I'm sorry, we have to go because we're going to go protest at the U.S. Embassy." And that was a wonderful experience. We had a wonderful talk about um, issues of blasphemy, issues of freedom of speech. Um, it was a really good bridge, or it was a really good connection for us. Um, as I've said, the students do the talking. Uh, I get a chance to um, moderate, to keep things on track. You can see in this slide here, they also see some diversity. I'm lucky that my classes tend to have people from many different cultures. This semester, I have 3 students from Japan, one from China, one from Sweden. I have couple of African American students. I have Latino students from Latin America. Um, and again, the technology is very, very simple. It's much like what we're doing, exactly what we're doing now. Um, yes, there's problems. It's never going to be perfect, but um, you can you'll find that with a little patience or a lot of patience, the system can work well, and the students really take to this. Um, and especially the students in Russia that they mention they often don't have the opportunity to do a lot of class discussion, and certainly not in English. And so this gives them an opportunity to do that. It takes a little time for everybody to, as we would say, warm up. Let me come back to this question about, or the topic about using PowerPoint. As I mentioned, um, what we do is we negotiate with our partners as to what do their students want to hear about. We all start out with introductions, good place to begin, but those teach a great deal um, about the home culture, about the people. Um, the students in Yeditepe University in Istanbul, they take 8 or 9 or 10 courses a semester, where my students only take maybe 4, maybe 5 classes. So even just the introductions give the students a chance to learn something about cultural differences. Um, we have an online course management system that allows our partners to upload and download presentations, again, much like what we're doing right now. And then, as you can see in the sample slide there, the students are talking, we're following along with their presentations. Um, it really helps with language issues because, again, my students U.S. American students always talk so fast. um, Most U.S. American students speak about 150 to 175 words a minute. Um, I try to get them down to maybe 100 words a minute. Um, and so they get practice doing that and then by having PowerPoints with some descriptions there, it lets our partners come back and ask questions. Um, a student might mention um, that they work and they mention the name of a company, but they just assume everybody knows what that is. We had a case with our international students or with our partners where uh, again, sometimes we don't always understand them until we read the PowerPoint. We had a Russian student, describe his typical day, and it included going to a liquor store. And before we saw the slide, he said, I go to the liquor store to buy beer, vodka, and shampoo. And we were thinking, shampoo? Uh, and then we saw the slide. Oh, champagne was what he was talking about. But again, we have presentations on the about their daily lives. We have we had presentations once dealing with the Great Patriotic War. Um, Russian students especially know so much about the Great Patriotic War. And for my students, uh, they know so little about their own history. Russian students usually know more about American history than American students do. Once this was suggested by a Russian professor, we had American students do presentations about Russian culture. And then the Russian students talked about American culture. So we had the Russian student, the American students did presentations on the Russian space program, Russian ballet. Um, the Russian students did presentations about Ford Motor Company, McDonald's, not surprising. It was a wonderful chance for us to check our perceptions. Um, and again, they so many of their initial, assumptions, generalizations, stereotypes get challenged and in some case, I don't want to say corrected, but certainly addressed in a course like this. Here's a picture of one of our classes with Pakistan. And I wanted to show you this because, as I mentioned, we really feel like we're in the same room. The hours that go by, again, we meet either 1.5, 2 hours, or 3 hours a week, depending on the connection. This picture, I hope you can see it well, um, is, um, is one of the students in Pakistan in the video. And when I was there, I bought my wife some of these scarves. And there's a certain way that you're supposed to wear them. And the women in Pakistan said, does your wife know how to wear those? And I said, no. So I brought the scarves to class. Um, my assistant stood up, and the women in Pakistan were instructing her on how to wear the scarves. And the reason I show you this picture is when the woman on the video told my student to move the scarf on a certain shoulder and my student made a mistake, the woman in Pakistan reached towards the screen to try to adjust the scarf. And again, just a split second, and she was very embarrassed. But she forgot for just a second that we weren't in the same room. It was remarkable. I was almost in tears. I was so excited about that event that she forgot. We felt so at ease. In the picture that I showed you, and I'll show you another one of us taking our class picture, we've had situations where when a student in the other country steps out of the screen, my students try to look around the corner and see where they went. So you really do. We really enhance this by encouraging students to play music. Seems like somebody always in a Russian school, especially Voronezh, brings a guitar. Um, at the end of the semester, I do a Turkish breakfast for the class with Turkey. I may do a Russian breakfast. Um, uh, we've had dance exhibitions. Some of the Turkish students did belly dancing for us. Um, on our class with Turkey last week, the men showed us a ritual they do when one of their fellow students goes in the army. Um, it involved throwing the men up in the air. It was really wonderful. Um, we had a wonderful class where some school children, Turkish school children, were brought in, and they did some singing for us. A couple of the students did. Oh, what is that? There's a Korean song, Gangnam Style by Psy, and these little children were doing the Gangnam Style dance. It was just remarkable. It's not, yes, that's not serious, but it brings the culture alive, and that's what I'm hoping. That's what this class does. Here's a sample, my next slide, showing one of the slides that the students in Russia prepared. Um, uh, they were talking about their daily life. And I love this slide because this could be a dormitory anywhere, almost anywhere in the world. Um, the students were talking about getting ready for class, and um, my students just really reacted well to this. Um, and again, the way to see their daily life in ways that they would never see elsewhere. Um, I think that's something that I really try to stress when I talk about the advantages of this. Um, this model really enhances learning because it lets students do things that they normally wouldn't be able to do, that they can talk to native speakers in real time. Um, Different than a classroom, different than a regular kind of classroom. Um, and they do it in a group, which I find helps because some of their fellow students may speak speak better than they do, and so they'll help out. The instructors can help out. So it's not so much a different. So it's a very collaborative environment. Um, and as I mentioned, we experience real problems um, that you would experience face to face. Again, in my travels, I don't always understand the persons I'm talking to, and so I have to work at that. Um, yes, we have technical problems. We had a situation where our partners could see us and we could see and hear them, but they could not hear us. So my students very quickly got large poster boards out and wrote their questions and held them up to the screen. We problem solve when there's difficulties. Um, the kinds of things that they learn too, they never find in textbooks. Um, my students were really surprised when uh, we heard this from both Turkey and from Russia was students they they did presentations on the national exams and some of the ways that people cheat on those exams. We had students talk about writing answers on their fingernails or various parts there. to me, the content part was less important than the fact that, again, they're hearing things that they would never hear elsewhere, and makes it gives a humanity to their partners, to our international partners there. Um, these are the kind of things that students really enjoy. They really, we go back and we talk about, what did you learn? I have my students fill out a worksheet every class period where they write, were there words that were used they didn't understand? Did they feel they weren't, were there ways they could have communicated better? So they get a wonderful journal at the end of the semester of their experiences. Let's see. And it's not just the students that benefit from this. Um, we create these truly intercultural teaching partnerships because I give our partners control over, excuse me, the um, our classroom management system that allows them to upload and download materials. This semester with one of our Turkey schools, we experimented uploading and downloading short little 30-second, 60-second video clips of daily life. And that's been very helpful and very useful. Um, we have discussions live most of the time, and then we have online interaction. I really encourage students to set up to connect with our partners via email. We create a Facebook page. I don't require students to participate. I'm not comfortable doing that, but it gives them a chance to post videos and music and other things. Um, and we negotiate every aspect of the course. I do not want this course, when I do it, to be um, my imposition of a U.S. cultural agenda. Um, I find that uh, by letting us talk about what's best for all of our students, it really, really helps. Um, and it gives a new model sometime for teaching for students, excuse me, for faculty as well. Um, I wanted to show you our current partners that I work with. Um, again, I work with two schools in Russia. We did work with another school in Ufa, but um, we weren't able to continue. With the school in Pakistan, I did work with Yemen, but that uh, uh, when I see a question about Blackboard. Blackboard's a course management system that's uh, faculty and students can go to an online site, kind of like a cloud site, and upload and download materials. So that gives us a very easy way of sharing our resources. Um, but you can see the various partners that I've developed over the years. Um, Costa Rica and Egypt were our two recent partners that we've had. Um, and I've tried to focus on what I refer to as, non-dominant universities. I'm not that interested in connecting with, well, I'd love to go to Paris, but my students hear a lot about many European countries. They hear a lot about Moscow and St. Petersburg. They certainly don't know much about Western Siberia. They don't know much about the Black Earth or Black Soil region of Russia. Um, while we connect with Turkey in Istanbul, we also connect with Erzurum, which is almost to the Iranian border. In Spain, we don't go to Madrid, we go to Castilla-La Mancha. Um, um, and with Costa Rica, we connect not with San Juan, but with San Ramon, which is over on the Pacific side of the country. Um, so I try to work with schools that, and this is the hardest part of doing this, is finding partners. Um, um, Finding partners that are willing to take the time to learn the technology, which is usually very easy. Um, uh, Willing to make a schedule that works for all the partners together. Um, I've always had my class at 8 in the morning because that tends to work for most of our partners. Um, that's the earliest I can do the class. But uh, the more partners I have, the more sections that I'll be able to teach as well too. Um, I don't want to go into the technology. The model uses this. This one model is using the Polycom or a Tandberg system. As you can see, by using the commercial internet, we um, it requires very little bandwidth, 256K. It has a standard connection. Recently, we started using what's called Adobe Connect, which is very much like what we're using right now. Um, the where you can see a PowerPoint slide and you can see the video. Um, this um, there are many. I've not been able to use Skype. The quality tends not to be as good. The sound is not as good. Um, we use very inexpensive cameras, uh, maybe 60 US dollars. We can use them less than that or built-in cameras. The problem with the built-in camera to a laptop is it doesn't have a very large, it doesn't have much depth of field, so it's hard to see everybody. As you could see in this picture, this class with Turkey has about, 26, 27 students, um, and it works very well. Um, in some of our partners, because of the problem with scheduling classes, sometimes they do it more as a extracurricular activity where students just meet uh, in a sense outside of class, though in the classroom. Um, but that's not optimal. We try to encourage people to have a regular class. Uh, this was one of our last, when I was last in Two Men there. Um, the students and faculty seem to really enjoy this. Um, I had another picture that I should have shown you. I took a photograph the first time in Erzurum, Turkey, when we connected with Lincoln, and people were just so excited. Um, it, the idea of talking to U.S. Americans without the U.S. government, without any of that in the way. When I went to Pakistan, over 50 Pakistani women were in the room an hour before I ever connected. By the time we connected with Lincoln, I had 120 Pakistan women and maybe 30 or 40 outside the door looking in, just excited to have an opportunity to talk face to face with US American students. Um, we talk about our class. It's not my class. It's not Artak's class. It's not Andre's class. Um, we really feel like we've created a common learning space. Um, I do, I think there's more challenges doing this probably for elementary school children. Um, but even if you can only do maybe 2 or 3 or 4 connections, um, it gives them an experience that I find very motivating. Let's see. I'm going to end right here by saying thank you, and seeing what kind of questions that I can answer for you. Um, I also want to stress that I can make available uh, any materials from my course, my syllabus, my descriptions of technical requirements. Um, as I saw a couple of people mentioned some interest in maybe even partnering with us or partnering with other schools, I would love to do that. But what questions can I answer for you or try to answer for you? I'll do my best. It's good to see comments from my friends and two men. Let's see. Oh, the questions are in another. Are they in another part there? Ah, okay. I switched over to where it says questions there, and there's several here. The the question about integrating in the course. I do a course where the web conferencing is the major part of the course. The first 6 weeks or so, we read a textbook about intercultural communication. I prepare them for working with international partners, a lot of instructions on what to expect. And then once US American classrooms tend to start, um, again, about 6 weeks before the rest of the world. And so we use that time to get ready. And then the class I'm teaching this semester is every Tuesday. We meet twice a week. Every Tuesday we connect with Istanbul. Every Thursday we connect um, with Eastern Turkey, Ataturk University. I have another section where every Monday we connected with Tumen State University. Um, every Wednesday we connected with Costa Rica. Um, the technical requirements again require nowadays very little. This laptop would be an internet connection would be a sufficient place to start. The bandwidth has to be at least about 256K, which nowadays is actually, again, very easy to achieve. Um, when we use Adobe Connect, which is a software-based, a cloud-based system, our university has the site license. So we simply invite participants, much like what we're doing now. Um, Finding partners is, like, say, the hardest part of the course, hardest part of doing this. Um, in almost every case, um, I've had to travel to another country to meet with administrators to convince them that this would be a good thing for their students there. Um, I try to be a conduit. I try to be a mediator. That's not the right word. Um, a liaison between various schools, especially if elementary schools are interested in connecting. Um, I think that um, one of the things that is necessary to be successful is to think about how this would be integrated into a particular course. The schools we work with the school I work with in Istanbul is an intercultural communication course, but in Eastern Turkey, it's an English language and literature course. In Tumen, we work with students in biological sciences. In Voronezh, we work with students in agricultural economics. In Pakistan, we work with students in diplomacy and conflict resolution courses. So in each of those cases, the professors determine how best to integrate that in the course. Um, in our case, with issues of diversity, so important in U.S. American universities, especially in Nebraska, where we don't have the same diversity, say, as New York City. Um, this opens up whole new worlds for my students, new ways of thinking, new ways of looking at the world. Um, it makes them very sensitive to issues that they may not have thought about before. Um, a recent earthquake in Pakistan led to many of my former students calling me saying, is Rabia okay? Is Muhammad okay? Asking about people from a year or so ago that they're very worried about. Um, so it opens up things that they never would have thought about before. Um, I got students donating money to relief. There was a terrible mining tragedy in Turkey last year in Soma where many miners were killed. And so many of my students just had an outpouring of grief and wanting to know what to do to help. I've never had classes like that before, where it actually kind of brought out a humanity to my students that I don't want to say they weren't human before, they weren't caring, but this class made culture personal to them. Um, what other kind of questions can I address for people? Um, and again, like I say, people have asked about school children. Again, I teach at the university level, so that's been my focus. But I I guess I see no reason why, if there's some flexibility with the program, that it could not be incorporated. Um, you would just need like-minded teachers and administrators in both universities, excuse me, in both schools. Um, I realize that's not an option for many. Not that they don't have creative or caring faculty administrators, but if they're like American elementary schools, kindergarten through the senior year of high school, they have so many restrictions on what has to be taught, um, how many hours a day they have, and I completely understand that. And this may not be a model that helps everyone. Um, though we've had a couple of situations where my college class has connected with high schools just temporarily, one or two classes. Um, so in a sense, my students become the teachers, maybe lecturing to them.
Maybe someone would like to ask some questions, to put some questions to Charles in person, so
Yeah.
uh,
Somebody just asked about
I can
the
start
basic connection
asking.
is again
So if you
a
would like to,
camera and
yeah, if you
we
would like
use
to press,
one TV set and then we have
press,
a
press,
projection screen where we connect a laptop with a projector so we can show the PowerPoints. Um, uh, and that allows us to do a system. That's one way of doing it. With a system like what we're using right now, um, again, we use Adobe Connect, but something, if it was like this webinar system, as long as you had this connected with a projector so everybody could see each other, could see the PowerPoint, it works very well. I like the idea too of using this in a media class as well. Our students are moving into worlds where they're going to be using video conferencing much more than I certainly did. Um, and I have several students that you might know of the Gallup organization. They do polls around the world. Um, Several of my students have gone on to work for Gallup and incorporate this technology into the survey work that Gallup does. What other kind of questions can I address?
Okay, maybe some colleagues from Russia would like to broadcast. If you would like to, we send a request for turning on your camera and microphone.
I'm the only one that
Anyone?
had to be seen.
There is
Um, that
something
that I
opening
guess I
your
had a
binding
question
material.
too about if people wanted some
Yeah,
more of
maybe.
my materials, like again, descriptions of the technology, more, details on the content of the course. Uh, I'm not sure the best way to share that. Um, I mean, again, people could certainly, you know, I'm going to put my email address here, and that's my email address there. And if anybody would like to get more information, see more material, see more pictures.
Can't hear me?
I have lots of lots of
Can't hear
pictures. I'd
me?
be certainly glad to share those
Okay. Not
with
Maybe
anybody.
Can't
So did I
hear
get that
me?
correct? Yeah. It's
Okay. Not
cbraithwaite2 at
Can't
unl.edu.
hear me? Okay. Not Can't hear me? Okay. Not
I can't hear anybody
Can't
else.
hear me?
I see pictures, but I don't hear anyone. Oh,
Can't
now I
hear
hear
me?
you.
Okay. Not Am. I just wanted to share my experience of can't hear me? Okay. Not Am. I just wanted to share my experience of organizing
Yes.
and an exchange, an intercultural exchange in the course, but we didn't do any web
Oh,
conferencing because of the time difference. So we organized an email exchange with Portland State University, and it was done in the course of Linguistic and Cultural Studies in Russia, and in Portland the course was second language acquisition, and the students in America had their own task on analyzing the material they get from my students. And we did it twice, and it worked really well, but we couldn't arrange any real-time
mm,
communication. So thank you for some
yeah. I think
tips
it's
how to do it.
again,
And
it's hard because
our
with
university would
American
like to partner
universities
with
we
you.
have to start so
Thank you.
early, and I do know that it's uncommon for many universities in other parts of the world to have classes so late in the evening. So it is hard to do real time. Um, there's a lot to be gained from that, even if it was just a few classes. I love your idea of getting them started with email exchanges, working on assignments together. Um, the other way that we've done asynchronous, it is not at the same time, is recording some videos to where a student may do a short video, maybe an introduction or a description of something there in their country, and post that so students can watch it at another time. Um, that oops, I seem to have lost. There we are. Am I back? um, so that can be helpful as well. There we go. Yeah, I love the idea of using videos. It's getting easier for students to create those. It's getting easier to find places to post them. Um, Somebody had raised an issue earlier about with the question the word safety in that. I'm not um, I understand that's why I don't require students to participate in things like Facebook or other social media unless they really want to. I'm not comfortable requiring that. It opens them up to to a world that I'm not always sure is good. But I think that there's many ways to put students in contact with one another. Um, I do say that my students and even myself uh, have not been aware of diversity issues, and especially in Russia. We have this stereotype of kind of Russian people as if they're just one monolithic group, and because of the large um, oops, thought I oops. Well, I don't can't tell if can anybody hear me? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. It looked like I wasn't broadcasting. Um, okay. Now that you can hear me, I don't know if I have anything to say. I'm
We
sorry.
can
Say
hear
again.
you and see you very, very well.
Okay.
We can hear you and see you very, very well.
Now that you can see and hear me well, like I say, I'm not sure I have anything important to say. Uh, like I say, I do feel like a religious evangelist trying to sell a certain viewpoint, but um, I do know how difficult it is to try to incorporate some new technology and methods in the classroom because of the restrictions we all have as teachers, because of scheduling, because of content that we have to cover. I completely understand that. I'm lucky that I have some degrees of freedom here that I didn't have elsewhere. So that lets me do things like this. But it probably helps that my wife is my department head. It's the head of the faculty.
We can hear you and
I've certainly enjoyed your questions and your comments. And again, I was so pleased to get this invitation. I've made some very good friends working in Russian with Russian schools, and it's made me a better teacher. It's made me, I think, a better person with the friends that I've developed there. And this is just another chance for me to extend that. Um, if there's no other questions, I guess we end here. My understanding is these materials, at least the presentation I uploaded is available. Um, but again, I included my email there if you want a copy of this, if you want other materials, if you'd like to talk about maybe, developing a connection with my school or others, those of you working with elementary students, school children. um, I have colleagues here in Nebraska at several schools that I think would be very interested in talking to you, and I could be a liaison there. So please let me know what I can do to help. And I apologize for not speaking Russian. The next time I travel, I'll have a better grasp on that. Ah, good. I can see where the recording of the webinar is. I also have some research papers that I published on this, um, that I can make available too, chapters and books, um, so that talk a little more in detail about this. And I have, again, other materials. So
Yeah, Charles, we would like to thank you from the part of the organizers of the webinar, and I believe from the part of all the users who are present today at the webinar, for your inspiring and motivating, I know, activities and your speech, which I believe will lead to not only sharing your experience but also to developing um, the same activity here in Russia. And I believe that those who are interested, who are really interested in what you do and the technology, methodology, they will contact you. Mm, but as far as I can see, there are no
okay.
more
Well,
questions.
thank you
So
very much.
this is why I believe that we can let
Yeah,
you
you have a
go.
good evening, everybody, and
Thank
I'll
you, thank you very,
my
very
day's just getting started here. But I really appreciate this opportunity very much, and I'm looking forward to. Please keep me posted on other things that you're doing.